Hello, I'm Rabbi Michael Cohen, and I have the pleasure of speaking with Mitchell Rothman about his life with the Mordechai Kaplan diaries, which, if I'm not mistaken, began at your bar mitzvah. So, Mitchell, tell us.
My my father died when I was 10. So my bar mitzvah was an emotional time for the family. And my grandmother, my father's mother, sat in the front row and cried through the entire process. She finally calmed down. And the rabbi, whom I considered to be a fatuous ass, got up and said something to the effect of, "I'm sure your father is with us somewhere." And he set her off again. I wanted to punch him in the face. And I said to myself, anything this fatuous ass believes can't be true. So
It's got kind of negative Maimonides, negative theology here.
negative theology. And at that point, I really ceased to believe in that idea um, of some kind of anthropomorphic God, of some kind of God who can interfere in the events on Earth. I mean, for one obvious reason, and I wouldn't have said it occurred to me at the time, why did my father die? If if there's a benevolent God somewhere, no benevolent God would have taken my father. And so I didn't know it at the time, but that's when I would become Kaplanian. And um, one of the things that my mother did to keep the family together was she took a job as the secretary to what was then called, I think, the Jewish Student Fellowship at Syracuse University. We lived in Syracuse. And it's since become Hillel, but it was located in a multi-faith chapel. And there was the rabbi there was Dr. Fred Krinsky, who taught history at Syracuse and also had a SME for ordination. He was my bar mitzvah tutor. And I have a copy of Judaism as a Civilization that has my mother's name in it.
Mm.
My mother had, wrote her name. And I'm quite sure that that came about because Fred Krinsky introduced her to the ideas of Kaplan and of Reconstructionism. So it's not just, it's also almost hereditary, you might say, that my
Okay.
interest in Reconstructionism. But so I was looking for, I felt the same way Kaplan felt, it seems to me. Kaplan really struggled with his inability to believe in a supernatural deity or being or whatever, but his strong commitment to Judaism and Jewish practice and Jewish ethics and the Jewish civilization. And he really that was the same struggle that I had. That I had felt a strong commitment to Judaism, but couldn't accept supernaturalism. And so that's what drew me to Reconstructionism. And then once there, I read some Kaplan. I mean, I always said if you really can't get to sleep, read Judaism as a Civilization. Right? It's one of those things where the ideas are astounding and the prose is stultifying.
That's an interesting gap. Yeah, good. And
Um,
when were you introduced to the diaries? Where did that come along in your spiritual autobiography, if I can say that?
I don't know. I think it must have been Mel Scult at one of the Kaplan Center conferences or one of those,
Uh-huh.
or one of the um, then JRF conferences.
Hmm.
Um, I don't know for sure, but I think it was Mel Scult, and I think he
Uh-huh.
had the first volume there, so I bought that,
Yeah.
and I now have all of the three that have been published. Um, and maybe I shouldn't admit, but one of the time I most intensely read the diaries, I don't sit down and read the diaries mostly, but I bring a copy of one of the diary books with me to shul. And during the Torah service and the chanting of the Haftorah, if there is one, which I find the most, because I don't understand Hebrew well enough, and I find the most uninteresting parts of the service, I read the diaries, and I find wonderful things. And we have had at Darchei Noam, I think, like other congregations, we've had to work hard to make to help people to understand what Reconstruction is about.
So what would be your, that's always a challenge for Reconstruction. So kind of what's your elevator pitch, or your 3 minutes? Someone says, please explain to me, what do you say?
I usually do the, Reconstructionism, or Kaplan defines Judaism as the evolving religious civilization of the Jewish people, and you can unpack that in your elevator speech, and I think make a pretty clear notion. Then throw in, because that doesn't say anything about God and supernaturalism, so you would need to throw that in again. And I think that does a pretty good job of encapsulating what Reconstructionism is about and wants to be about, and wants to continue to evolve Judaism. But the diaries show us how Kaplan evolved, because Kaplan very much evolved, and Kaplan's ideas about God especially keep evolving, and you'll find some kind of there's some extraordinary statements in there in the diaries that that just bring me up short. I recently found one that said, God gave Israel the Torah. God gave Israel the Torah. Well, okay, but so he kept, he just had thoughts all over. And we had some time ago, we did a 4-part course called Judaism Reconstructionism 101. And I and 3 other members of our congregation each gave one session. So that was a way of concretizing some of the things I had thought about. And then as I read the diaries, I started to see that there would be a way to introduce people to Kaplanian thought and to Kaplan through a talk on the diaries. And so I put together such a talk and gave it at Darchei Noam. And then since I have also given it at Toronto Limud, and we have a Tikkun Le'el Shavuot, an all-night study session that's sponsored by a number of congregations at a downtown Jewish community center, and I've given that essentially the same talk there.
So in your going through the diaries, any particular writings of his from the diaries that really kind of stand out, or you just think are just like the most important or compelling?
As I said, I think a lot of it is a talk about God and theology and how we view God. And then if there is no supernatural God, then what is the purpose of prayer? These are issues that I think all of us as Reconstructionists probably struggle with, because and because those are basic issues for Kaplan. Also, I think the other thing I would try to do is, we have is to bring people in our congregation to along to think about Reconstructionism. One of the things that struck me in the diaries is Kaplan's talking about I think it's 1952, when he is first able, actually it's Ira Eisenstein, who was first able to persuade the members of the Society for the Advancement of Judaism to let women have an aliyah. Mm-hmm. He notes in the diary about who had the aliyah. One of them was Judith, and one of them was his wife. And he says at the end of that passage, I have to deal with the fact that most of my congregation are not Reconstructionists. Mm. If most of his congregation are not Reconstructionists, then really most of our congregations are probably not Reconstructionists, in the sense that they really understand what Reconstructionism is about reconstructing Judaism. It's about to make a Judaism that is so important, so vibrant, so relevant, so able to meet the needs of Jews, that we will continue to be Jewish and adhere to Judaism.
Yeah, I would say the other challenge, and there's lots of challenges we have, but I would say in addition to that gap between, prayer and a supernatural God, is the whole system is based upon the mitzvot, right? A supernatural God commanding. And that's, yes, as we can see in the non-Orthodox world, or in the Orthodox world, that's a very powerful dynamic. And I don't think we get to figure that out in the non-Orthodox world, how to reconstruct that, if you will, holy obligation. We haven't figured it out yet. And that's also part of our challenge, which is related to what you were saying as well.
Well, but that is that's key, isn't it? Because we think of Judaism as a system of ethics, and Kaplan did too, and that was, of course, the past should have a vote, not a veto. That is, you look at the mitzvot, you look at the chagim, and Kaplan says, if you can reinterpret these to be meaningful in a modern context, then we keep them and reinterpret them. If we can use them as they stand, fine. If we find them abhorrent or impractical under current context, then we should reinterpret them and use them as we can. And if not, we reject them. So we don't have Reconstructionists looking for a red heifer, right? Whereas there are people who are. And they are people. I see that there is comfort for Hasidim or Orthodox people who say, I don't have to make decisions. They're made for me. They're laid out in the mitzvot. If I have a question, I go to my Rebbe and he will tell me what to do. I don't have to make any decisions. My life is almost circumscribed. Not just what I do, what I wear, with whom I associate, what I eat, with whom do I eat, what is my occupation, either for making money or for studying Torah. I don't have to make decisions. And Reconstructionism asks people to make decisions constantly.
But I think our challenge is, do we? Let's say daily learning. Do we, even 10 minutes a day? Do we? I mean, you're right, but I sometimes whether we don't push ourselves enough, but that's a whole other discussion.
Yeah, I mean, there are those who say we do too much, or the movement has done too much. But yeah, you're right. We don't every day. Well, we do make decisions every day. The question is, do we make decisions on an ethical basis every day? Mm-hmm. And do we as a congregation make decisions on an ethical basis? It's one of the things that I'm currently on the board of Darshei Noam, and one of the things that I would like Darchei Noam to come more farther back to is the idea of values-based decision-making for the congregation.
Yeah.
And right now, we're making essentially money-based decisions for the congregation, which is not unreasonable because we got a money problem like almost all mainstream congregations. In fact, in some ways, we're better off than others. But that's where the congregation has been moving, and I think we should be back to values-based decision making, and it served us well. I don't know if you've been to Toronto, but we have a really beautiful building that we bought and renovated with money that we raised first from within the congregation, and then we had attracted a large donor who was very impressed by how dedicated our congregants were. And we designed that building and used this building on the basis of values-based decision-making with a number of internal committees. And that's what I think we need to continue to do. And more recently, we've had an internal study about how do we address intermarried people, members of our congregation who are not Jewish, and what is their role within the congregation? What is their role within the ritual? What is their role, particularly, of course, with respect to a bar or bat mitzvah of the child of an intermarried couple, of one with one parent is not Jewish? And that was on the basis of extensive consultation within the congregation. And they came up with a report that was essentially adopted by the board. I think it hasn't been sufficiently implemented. The author of that report has now just rejoined the board as ritual chair. So we'll see how that goes.
So we have just a few more minutes here. So kind of tying all this together, in what way would you say Kaplan is still relevant here at the beginning of the 21st century?
I think a lot of Kaplan is still relevant. I think a lot of what he says in books like The Future of the American Jew and Judaism Without Supernaturalism, he talks about how we apply in practical terms his ideas about the Hagim and his ideas about the functioning. I think those are very relevant. I think we don't have to be asking questions like, as I just did about the war, what would Kaplan say, right? And the Christians ask, what would Jesus say? We don't have to treat Kaplan like that. But I think we do look at what Kaplan said about how we do those things. And in many cases, I think we can just follow what Kaplan was saying. But Kaplan, there's one of the things that we read the diary, you find there's a lot of kind of humorous incidents. And one of them, I think, was kind of telling, was after Shabbat services, after lunch on Shabbat one time, Judith was already married to Ira at that point. And Judith and Ira and the other daughters, the girls, wanted to take the car and go to the beach. And Kaplan said, no, it's Shabbat, you can't take the car, you shouldn't go to the beach. And they all chimed in on him. They all, in unison, told him, what are you talking about? We're going to do this. I don't know exactly what they said, but finally he said, okay, go to the beach. So this is Kaplan thinking about himself and his own ideas, and how do they get applied by his own family. And eventually he says, yeah, I guess if we think about it that way, this is all between the lines, but I guess if we think about that way, they're right. It's a worthwhile. It's a thing we can do.
Great. Well, thank you, Mitchell. Thanks for the conversation and that anecdote, and look forward to more at some point. Anyhow, thank you very much.
Thank you.